Today I am building myself a router table. Hey guys, how's it going? So, up until recently, I haven't really had a need for a dedicated router table. However, now I do have a project coming up that does require one, or at least will make the project go a lot easier. You might have also noticed I don't necessarily have room in my shop for a router table. I could fit one in my table saw wing, but anything I found in my 30 seconds or so of looking for a commercially available option would be too big for the available space. Looks like a custom build is my only option. I'm so disappointed. One of the main pushes to build myself a router table was actually finding this old seriously warped job site stand at a garage sale, which had this handy non-warped, or at least not nearly as warped mounting plate, where you could attach either a circular saw or a router. I figured this plate and the switch box was worth the $15 I paid for it, as well as the few clamps I got him to throw in. So, finally, to start this project off, I started disassembling and salvaging what I wanted to keep out of this job site stand, and got rid of the rest. With my table saw and workbench now cleared off, and the salvage set off to the side, I start the construction of the table itself. I head over to the scrap bin and pull out a couple 2x4s, and then head over to the miter saw and cut them to the required lengths. With that done, I head back to the table saw and set the blade to 3/4 inch height using a scrap of 3/4 inch MDF, and cut a rabbet out of the 2x4s. Then with a little bit of chisel work, I cleaned up the little bit of material left over. With the rabbets cleaned out, I clamped the 2x4s together with a right angle clamp and screwed the 2x4s together. I made sure to keep the rabbets down against the table saw surface to ensure that at least the top of the frame was flat. Bottom can do whatever it wants, I don't give a shit. Now with the frame built, I measure between the rabbets, pull a 3/4 inch thick MDF scrap out of storage, cut it to size, and drop it into place. With that done, I center the mounting plate on the MDF, make sure it's squared up, and mark out the perimeter of the plate. Then I grab my combination square and mark out an offset around the interior of the perimeter of the mounting plate. Then I get my jigsaw and cut out the center of the MDF. I can't remember why I did it at this point, but whatever, it needed to be done eventually. I throw a self-centering drill bit in my drill and drilled out the mounting holes for the mounting plate. And then since the self-centering bit only goes so deep, I sent the holes the rest of the way with the countersink bit. Then I broke out the trim router and threw a 3/4 inch straight bit in it, and then set the depth of the router using the plate as the depth. Oh, that's why I did it. I needed to countersink the underside of the mounting plate mounting screws so that it would sit flush on top of the table. See, there's usually a reason why I do the things I do. Now that the router is set up, I route out the inset for the mounting plate. Not my best router work, but it's good enough for a shop project. And now that I've routed away all my countersinks, I re-countersink them all and cut out any of the extra MDF that prevents the plate from sitting flat with a chisel, and it looks like we're good to go. Last thing to do to fasten the plate to the MDF is to widen the mounting holes to fit the screws. And I can bolt the plate in place with the screws and wing nuts I salvaged from the old original stand. Since I'm not fastening the MDF to the rest of the frame, I drilled out a finger grip hole on the side of the panel just to make it easier to pull up and remove the router if I need. As well, if I wanted to use this space for another table mount tool like a spindle sander or a pocket hole jig, I can mount whatever I need to another sheet of MDF and swap out the whole station in about 30 seconds. I thought that was clever. At this point, I figured it was time to mount the table into my table saw wing, but first I would need to pull out the plywood piece I installed as a placeholder, so I would stop nutting myself on the ends of my table saw rails. Once was enough. The distance between the rails was enough for a relatively tight fit, but it wasn't tight enough for it to hold the table up without help, so I clamped the rails together while I screwed the table into place. Using my level to make sure the tops of both the table saw and the router table were level, I initially tried to fasten the router table in using the pre-drilled holes already in the saw rails. But I wasn't too happy with how loose the router table was, and I didn't have the hardware to utilize those holes correctly. However, I felt that it was built enough to the point where I could do a test run, so while I thought of a way to more properly mount the table, I broke out the router and after a bit of fiddling with my admittedly janky setup, I bolted it to the table. With the test run out of the way, I now know that A, 2 mounting bolts isn't enough, B, the rounded bolt tops aren't the best for having a flat work surface. And C, the fiberboard backer really wasn't as helpful strength-wise and thicker than it needed to be, so I got rid of it. I decided that a steel plate would work better in this situation as I could mount the router base solidly to it. Then mount the base end plate to the mounting plate as a solid unit, thereby strengthening the mounting bolt connection, as well as the rigidity of the mounting plate. That was a bit of a tongue twister. With that figured out, I ran out to the hardware store and picked up some new bolts to bolt the router table down, some 16 gauge plate steel, and some new bolts to bolt the plate to the MDF. Everything else is going to be nice and shiny, why not? While I was out, I also figured out my solution to mount the table better. So I clamped it up level and drilled new holes in the table saw rails and screwed in through those. The new holes had no wiggle space and locked the router table in very solid. Now that the router table is properly secured to the table saw rails, I pulled the mounting plate out again and used it as my template to mark out all of the holes I needed to drill out of the steel plate. And then I pulled the plastic base off the router base and marked those holes out on the plate as well. Before heading over to the drill press, I cut this section out with the angle grinder, deburred the edges with a file, and then attacked the plate with the step bit drill in the drill press. Perfect fit. Now the last things to do are attach the router base to the steel plate, making sure that the router adjustment knobs and lock are facing me, or at least where I will be on the table. Attach the steel plate to the mounting plate, making sure that all of the holes are lined up. Attach the mounting plate back onto the MDF, again making sure that everything is facing the way it's supposed to. Oh, and mount the switch box. The built-in switch on the router is a bit of a pain to find upside down. And that is where I'm going to call it for now. At the time, my thought was to just use the table saw fence as the fence for the router table as well. However, that thought lasted about 5 seconds into my first attempt at doing that. So next week's video will be the fence and hooking everything up to dust collection. And with that, I'm going to call it a video. So thank you all for watching, and if you like what I'm doing here, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. If you have any questions or comments, I look forward to reading them in the comment section below. And if you want to see more up-to-date projects, you can follow me on Instagram at JohnTheShriner. Otherwise, I hope to see you in the next video, and have a good one.